Okay. Now, for everyone, if you are at all wondering what it is you found yourself in, today we are gathered to talk about the latest discoveries and science in 2021 in the practice of successful meetings. This session is, as I told Lisa, who's joining us to help with some graphic capture today, I told her this is session 11 of 10. Because what we have been doing since August of last year is working our way through the 10 science-backed rules for meaningful meetings. And in the chat there, you can see a link to the course that this particular session is related to. And in August, we looked at Rule 3, and then we looked at each of these rules in turn. So we basically have been running a very long online conference diving into the science and practice of effective meetings. And today we are here to revisit those rules and say, okay, well, how have those rules changed, right? The rules themselves are mostly intact, but how has our understanding of them evolved in the last 18 months? And based on what we've learned in the last 18 months, what else might we add to those rules if we were writing them now? So I know many of you have been to some of our sessions before, and if you have, what I would love for you to do is to turn on your camera and wave at the group. So if anybody has been here before, just wave. So everybody who is brand new, if you find yourself into a breakout room with any of these waving people, welcome. Welcome to our party. This is what it is like. These people are here to help you have a fabulous conversation and an interesting experience and to share what they've learned as they've shared with other people, except for Louie, who is not. So welcome to our party. Now, I would love to see cameras on because the first thing we want to do is figure out who all is here in total. And we're going to do this using a slightly different polling mechanism. So for those of you who can turn your cameras on, and I know for some of you, you are in places where that's just not going to work for you. And if that's okay, please use the chat. But for those of you who do have cameras, I want you to go ahead and find a way to first turn it on and then cover it using your hand or a little flap or a piece of paper. Oh, excellent. Okay, now the first question I have for you is, shoot, my everything moved for me. Who here has more of their meetings online now than they were in 2019? Go ahead and reveal yourself. I would expect to see pretty much everybody, right? Like more online meetings than 2019. Okay. Go ahead and cover back up. Who is attending more meetings in total than you were in 2019? So in other words, who feels like you're spending way more of your time in meetings than ever before? All right, not everybody. Okay, interesting. All right, cover back up. So who has participated in one or more meeting trainings in the past year? Look at that. Meeting training was not a thing in 2019 that people did. So, all right, that's exciting to see. Okay, cover back up. And who here feels like they have become pretty skilled with at least one new kind of meeting tech? Like, for example, Zoom. You become pretty good at it. Yeah, a lot of people, right? Cool. So what if we change that to 2 new kinds of meeting tech? Like you've really mastered like Zoom plus something else. All right, what about 3 or more? Zoom and Mural and something, not as many. All right, so we've got a lot of tech, but not as much big tech. And then finally, last question. Go ahead and cover up for a second. Who feels Like your meetings are more successful now than they ever were before. Hey, all right. Look at that. Meetings are getting somewhat dog is like he's I'm not sure what to do with this paper, kind of maybe, but awesome. Okay, great. Well, that is, of course, our mission and our plan here today. So let me show you exactly, and you can all come back onto cameras now. Thank you so much. So here is our explicit plan. We are going to do an intro. Hey, guess what? We've all just sort of gotten a sense of who we are, intro done. And then we are going to dive into refreshing the 10 rules of meaningful meetings. Then we'll spend some time in breakouts, so you get to share some of what you have learned. What have you learned about meetings? What remains a question for you? After that, we'll come back and Joe will share with us exciting brand new science. And then we'll look together in our last 30 minutes at our predictions and trends for the future, because there are a lot of interesting things coming down the pipe. So with that, I am in fact going to share my screen for quite a bit of this. And the first thing I want to do is introduce you to Joe and have Joe say hi.
Hi.
So as I'm getting this up, let's get this. Okay, so as I mentioned, we go to 11 with this one. And for those of you who don't know me and my company, my name's Elise Keith. I'm the founder and CEO of Lucid Meetings, and our focus as a meeting innovation company is on the practice of everyday business meetings. And Joe?
Yep, that's me. I'm a professor at the University of Utah. I'm the director of the Center for Meeting Effectiveness and have been studying meetings for a decade and a half now, and have really adopted the idea that we can make our meetings better, but we have to figure out what the science can help us do and know what actually changes and makes them better and what actually doesn't. So that's what I've been doing for the last 15 plus years.
Joe and I have had an opportunity to collaborate quite a bit over the last 18 months. So as we work through this, we'll both just talk to them, and you are all welcome to communicate in the chat with each other. Now, if you find chat distracting, go ahead and turn it off. But let's go ahead and look at these 10 science-backed rules. So the 10 science-backed rules for meaningful meetings are listed here, and we're going to go through them one at a time. The very, very first rule about that science has validated is incredibly important to running successful meetings on an ongoing basis is experiment with meetings. And this is a screenshot from the session we ran with Dr. Chris Lordy, who looked at experimentation. Now, experimentation with meetings has exploded because we've had no choice. Right? Everybody's been forced into new ways of meeting. So some of the experiments that I thought were kind of interesting, and Joe, I'd love to hear what you think about these, but one has been the incredible explosion in communities of practice. I think Jody is on this call. So Judy Reese runs a community called Remote Together, which has been fabulous. Wave, Judy.
Hello, I was eating a biscuit.
See, this is the wonder of an international audience where it's a terrible time for a call in some parts of the world and great for others. But so Judy and her team run a great community where they talk about how to run effective online meetings, online events specifically. Another community that does an amazing job that way, and this is a terrible screenshot, but this is the calendar from the Liberating Structures community, and that's all of the events running around the world in just 1 week. So some of the experiments that teach us in the practice world how to do a better job have just gone crazy and very, very, very active. Other experiments have not been as successful. Who saw the lawyer cat?
Yep.
Right? Yeah, lawyer cat. So lawyer cat, that poor, I am not a cat. Really, it's important. And then we're seeing some really interesting experiments in the field of measurement. So one of the questions I'm asked as people go to try and change their meeting behavior is, how do we know that things are getting better? How do we measure this? One of the new measurements that we're seeing teams use is basically the way of working promoter score. So at the every month or so, they ask their team, would you recommend this way of working on a scale of 0 to 10 to other teams? So there's a very non-technical experiment and way of measuring those experiments. And then the other one, this is a screenshot, and it's a terrible little screenshot from a new company called Riff Analytics, which analyzes conversations like this for things like influence, affirmation, turn taking. So they can tell in real time using technology whether you're having a positive conversation or not. Joe, what are some of the experiments you're seeing?
Well, I think what was fascinating for me was that we all suddenly had to experiment with a format of meeting that some of us may or may not have done a lot with, right? And so I think what happened a lot is whether we call it an experiment or not, we were engaging in trial and error with our virtual meetings, right? And so it's been fascinating to see how people have adopted new things and then said, well, that's not really working real well. Let's not do filters anymore, that sort of thing, or a variety of other things. I think for me also, when I think of experiment, I think of research, and research is always behind. At least I always feel like I'm behind. And so we often, when I think of experiments, I think of all the design and getting people into whether it be a lab or in a virtual environment. And the interesting thing about that is that it takes time for the scientific experiments to catch up to the real world experimentation that we all need to be engaging in to try and figure out what makes our meetings better. And so I think for me, what has been fun to see is so many people taking a moment to reflect on their meetings and then trying new things. And that didn't happen in 2019. I think it took an unfortunate worldwide pandemic to get us to say, you know what, I think I could do this better, and try some things. Even if the first try was like that didn't work, but trying new things was really fascinating to see so many people doing that.
So experimentation is a huge theme, and we have a couple of experiments we're running here. The polling with the video, where only half the people are on video, that was a little bit of an experiment for this session. I hope you all will be making your own mental evaluations about how that's going. Let's go on. So the second rule in the 10 rules is define meetings. And this is all about making sure that when you show up to your meetings, they have a clarity of purpose and whatnot. Now, this rule, as far as I'm concerned, has not changed. This rule absolutely holds steady. I am a little bit sad to report that I believe that it has, in fact, taken a hit. So in the things that we have seen, what we are seeing is a growing herd, a proliferation of meetings on everybody's calendar that say things like, we need to sync up. Mm-hmm. We need to check in. Because as we have lost the ability to talk at the water cooler in the halls and whatnot, people are desperately filling that with meetings that lack purpose, lack definition. And it's leading to some of the things we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, as the pandemic, started going, I remember making the advice, hey, you need to have opportunities and moments to bump into each other. We don't do that anymore. And I think, unfortunately, some people thought of that and started doing that, but it translated into, let me invite my 10 favorite people and sync up. And that gets really expensive and really time draining. And so I think the key here is we need to have some humanity in our meetings. But we don't have to remove purpose in order to accomplish that.
Right. Yeah. So very few purposeful sheep standing up in the middle of the herds, unfortunately. So we're working on changing that collectively. You all are ambassadors for purpose. Technology. So technology is rule number 3, and that one obviously has worked well. I don't know if you recognize this gentleman here at the beginning. This is Scott Wharton to my left. Scott Wharton led our session on use technology back in August, and he was a happy dude because Scott Wharton is the VP of cameras for Logitech. And do you know what's in high demand? Cameras, right? You know who else is a happy dude? This guy in the middle. That's Eric. That's Eric Wan, the CEO of Zoom, which is, one of the legit expensive stocks now, not just because they've invested in Bitcoin. Like, they're doing great. And as you can see, facilitators and people who run meetings professionally have done an incredible investment in upping their game. So this is a screenshot of Douglas Ferguson's home studio. Douglas Ferguson is a facilitator. He's not a YouTube star. He is, not a musician. He runs design sprints, and he gets people into breakouts, and they talk about like what they like to see happen in their businesses and in their companies. And actually, if you have not seen Voltage Control's work, they do really great free workshops for people to come and just play with these things. But this is how he's evolved his technology. So hardware tech is just one of many kinds of tech that has evolved, but I think embracing technology, using technology, we're kind of taking a big check on that one. And now the question becomes, how does that technology evolve going forward? Joe, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think the terribly obvious thing about use technology, that rule, is that what's changed for me, or what I've seen, is the adoption rate. Before it was like, oh well, I'll get on a virtual call, but I don't really like the camera. I'm going to leave that off. Or there was not a lot of embracing of technology as a way to meet. I mean, it was happening some, and to a greater extent than previous in 2019. But man, did we adopt fast, and did we adjust fast? Some to great and wonderful outcomes, some to not so good outcomes. But that was the thing that changed the most for me on this rule, was just the adoption rate of people having to use, whether they like it or not, having to use technology for their collaboration.
So there's technology. Now let's talk about Rule 4. Rule 4 is avoid drift. That's stay on target. So we're working to stay on target right now in this call. This rule has not changed, in my opinion.
No. I think we still need to avoid drift.
And I have had somebody who looked at my slides earlier go, why have you used this picture? Well, I use this picture because this is a picture of Dr. Abrahams, who led a session on avoiding drift for part of our class. So every one of these pictures is actually from the courses that we ran on these topics. And it was fun, clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to the avoid drift, I think, actually goes into the technology thing. I remember, my background here. I remember when we first went online, my background did not look like this. I was in a variety of different situations and so forth, and I learned from others, including my co-author Karen Reed, that this matters, because if this is distracting, then people aren't looking at me. They're looking at that. They're looking at the other things, and they're not hearing what I'm saying. So I think the avoid drift is also, helping to keep attention, yes, and keep people engaged by not distracting them with things that just kind of happen in our background.
Yeah. Rule 5, build larger teams for some meetings. So this particular rule is about how, when we are doing things that call for divergence, like more ideas, more perspectives, more voices, we want more people in the room. I think this is the one that has absolutely nailed it in the last 18 months, because look at who's here, right? Look at who's here today. I heard I'm in Germany, but you can pronounce my name this way, and a bonjour. And I know we have some folks from all around who are building a larger team here together. And when you get a chance to come together and share your insights, that'll be a way in which you can maximize the divergence of our output, which is really exciting. Unfortunately, on the flip side, because it has become so easy, we have that proliferation of meetings that everybody's invited to that may or may not be relevant to what they're doing. So there is a dark side to too many people in a meeting. Joe, any thoughts?
No, I think you're absolutely right. That this rule kind of nailed it for the divergent type things. I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind, and this has been true before, is true now, is for certain types of activities, decision making, that sort of thing, more convergent type activities, larger teams actually doesn't help you. So this rule is really about making sure you appropriately size your meetings.
Embrace diversity. Now, I know this is a picture of a white woman on a white screen, so I understand this. This is Dr. Allison Brooks. She led our conversation about that, and she talked about the importance of, after you get everyone into the room, right? So you've got an interesting and diverse audience. How do you actually make it safe for them to share what they have to say? And there are a number of things that we have learned in the last 18 months that help with that. And we have learned quite a bit, and with a huge focus on inclusion and diversity, both about how to improve our ability to reach out to folks and bring them into the conversation than we did before, but also how to include them in that conversation when we're there. So if you will look now at the people in our group, and I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing this for just a second, you'll see that we have options. So providing options is one way in which you help with inclusion. Some of us have chosen to stay on camera, some of us have not. That's okay. Some of us will choose to speak when we have opportunities to speak. Some of us will not. Some of us, if you don't want to speak, can use the chat, right? Giving people options is one of the ways in which you allow for more diversity and inclusion. The other area and aspect in which we've seen some really great progress in the inclusion and diversity front is accessibility. So we still haven't nailed how to help people who don't have good internet participate in events like this one. But people who have challenges with visual or auditory interactions or even manual physical interactions have had a lot of tech come out to help. So one of the things we are experiencing and experimenting with today is live transcription. So if you look at the top left corner, at least it is for me, I hope it is for you, you might see it say live on custom live streaming service. Does anybody see that? So if you click that on the drop down, you can say view stream on custom live streaming service. And this is a robot listening to us talk and trying to give us basically closed captions in real time about what we're saying. The other thing that's wicked sweet about the robot transcript, beyond the fact that it will be funny because they will get it wrong, is that you can, if you choose to contribute in this way, go click on it and you can highlight things and you can add comments there. You can add screenshots of things that you thought were interesting. And we get a way to inclusively co-create our view of what's happening right now. So after this call, I will send a number of links to things that are other ways in which you can make Zoom, for example, more inclusive. And we'll answer these questions about the diversity. So Carolyn asked who led the diversity session. That is Dr. Allison Wood Brooks from Harvard. She's a specialist in conversational skills and taught us a lot about how do you make it safe for especially women who are in groups of men and not feeling like they can contribute to have not only be brought into the conversation, but to have their voices and their perspectives amplified. Right? Because in some ways, it's not who talks the most, it's who's heard that actually matters in our meetings. Joe, other thoughts on this before we move to Rule 7?
Yeah, one of the experiments that I did in relation to this, or actually it wasn't even in relation to this, I was just gathering data, frankly. We actually we recorded a bunch of virtual meetings like this, and we coded the data, and we did a count on how much talk time each of the people had in the meeting. And we were very surprised to see, this was in May of 2020, that people had more egalitarian talk sharing in these virtual meetings than they do in face-to-face meetings. And that's partly because the environment is different. In a face-to-face meeting, you often have a table, you have a power seat, you've got hierarchy, you've got other cues that are there that are somewhat normalized in the virtual environment. However, later on, as people got used to this environment, some of that socialization, some of that structure, some of those things that we embraced in the face-to-face meeting that we probably shouldn't have in terms of diversity and sharing and equity has started to creep back in. So data I collected just a month or so ago actually is different than what I got in May. Same teams, but we see more or less egalitarian sharing in the virtual meeting. So we've now embraced some of the things that have led to less equality and sharing than before, than when we first got onto these in this environment. So it's fascinating to see that immediately it was great. We had more equality, and then our old habits kind of crept back in. And so I think it's important for us to be aware of that and know that, okay, if you're really trying to embrace diversity and inclusion and so forth, you have to keep at it. You can't just expect, oh, well, if I change my environment, it's going to be better. Well, it might be for a few meetings, but then we return to our old ways, whatever that might be, which is oftentimes not as inclusive as it could be.
And I think we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit in trends, because we're starting to see, there was a lot of great stuff that happened right as the pandemic hit, and we're starting to see some backlash.
Yep.
As just people are just overwhelmed by trying to do everything right all the time. So 6, embrace diversity. Now, number 7, I believe Nancy is here today. This is Nancy, and she led us a fabulous fun session on embracing process. There's Nancy. She waved, yay, with the Christmas lights in the back. This has not changed, as in my opinion. This particular rule remains the same. When you have a meeting, it is important to get everybody clear on what to expect and engaged in the process of what to expect.
Yeah.
Anybody disagree with that? Is this one evolved at all? All right. So let's move on. Number 8, plan the design of meetings. Now, this one sounds like it's about how you would create an agenda, but in fact, it's actually about the design of physical spaces. And the gentleman shown here, this is Matt Chatter. Every other one of my presenters who knows Matt talked about having the deep man crush on Matt because he's fabulously interesting and cool. And he talked about how to make meeting rooms exciting to be in. Well, guess what happened? Nobody gets to go into the meeting rooms anymore. So this one has evolved like mad. Now we are starting to see some interesting things happen. For example, this is the honest hotel capacity chart, where you can look at a venue that you're thinking about trying to bring a group back together to in person and talk about your social distancing rules and whatnot. And it will tell you how many people you can actually put in there, regardless of what the hotel says. And I'll put a link to this in the follow-up notes, so you don't have to eye chart it quite so much. The other thing we're seeing is an explosion in technologies that are about trying to reimagine space in the digital world. So this is a screenshot from one of the simpler ones. This is Wonder. And in Wonder, you can set your background and you can design little digital spaces. And then when people join, they get little tiny avatars. And when their avatars move around the screen and bump into each other, then they have a conversation. So there are all of the kinds of tools that are trying to imagine, what if the space was not a physical space, but it was a virtual space, and we moved around it as people with autonomy, just like we would had we been in a conference setting. And you can make them purple, and you can put your, fantasy towers in the background or your office in the background. So there's all kinds of interesting tech trying to imagine our sense of space in the digital realm.
Yeah, and I think the thing I would add here is that I think the fact that we've been adopting these different technologies has led to people to start to think about, okay, can we push this further? What can we do further? And I've heard even people speculating, well, maybe we'll be like and then being a little bit nerdy here, but maybe we'll be like the Jedi Council, and we'll have projectors that'll project us into a council room, and we'll all have our avatar will be actually us, And so it's fascinating to think about, as this rule, how it's changed is that we're actually thinking about it. I think too often before it was like, oh, we're gonna have a meeting, well, let's go to the little conference table. We didn't really think about the space, whether it was virtual or otherwise. We just met, and now it's kind of like, well, no, there's something to this, and I think that's something that I think is unique about a lot of these, is that we're actually thinking about it. And so I think that's what's changed with this one, is that we're thinking about it, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have opportunities to plan spaces for hybrid meetings and some of the newer things that we've learned since this came out. So that's me and Tom in our tiny bubble, and there we are in our screenshot. All right, so use leadership to enhance performance. I also don't believe this one has changed, and this is very much about leaders need to show up and do a good job leading and making space for everybody. The two gentlemen who presented this one are Andy Walsh, who's a high performance coach for Red Bull, and Jürgen Heitmann, who is an ex-special ops operative and also currently a high performance coach. They do amazing work with teams, helping them unlock their achievement together. So a fabulous conversation, but I don't believe any changes in this one.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that I think the one thing that's changed for me is that I think more people have to do it. Because in a virtual meeting, when you've got your window into everyone's setting, if you don't say, Bob, what do you think? Susan, what do you think? Lisa, what do you think? If you don't actually call people by name, you often have that talking over each other and so forth that happens. And I think a lot of us have adapted that, but I think that's oftentimes more of a leader's responsibility than it is attendees' responsibility, and more of us need to embrace that. So if anything, there's a greater need for this than ever before.
Right. Final rule, plan for creativity and capture these outcomes. This is a picture of Shishir Maroda. He runs a company called Coda, which is a way in which people can organize their information and whatnot. This one, I think, has radically changed in the world of people who do professional facilitation for sure, because in the past it was flip charts and sticky notes. And now we have all kinds of things. So these are just some screenshots from events that I've run. This is a group that put together top 5 tips in a Google slide. And we walked out of the meeting and they had beautiful Google slides all created. This was an event I ran where we used Mural. And we walked out of the meeting and Mural board full of ideas that people could use afterwards was out there and ready to use. This is an event that we ran that uses Group Map. And again, walked out of the meeting, all of those ideas are there in a way that the company and the business can actually put to use. I will be shocked to see if everybody goes back to doing it all on sticky notes and paper. Because the value of being able, just like we are today with the live transcription and the recording, and I also want to show you one of the other things we're doing here. Lisa, are you in a place where you could share?
I am. If you'll pin my video.
Yeah, I will. And I'm going to I think that's it on this particular. So I'm going to stop sharing screen sharing. We're going to pin Lisa for a second.
So it's a little small, but I'll zoom in. I'm drawing this live on my iPad. So here we are with I'm still working on it, but here we are with our 10 rules.
So Elise, yeah, it's awesome.
Here's Elise. What do you think? Here you are.
Hey.
Working on it, but it's close.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So I keep you guys are saying so many great things. I have to keep, shrinking the space so I can leave room for all the other great stuff you've got going on.
So with the use of technology and with a little bit of planning ahead, we can get multiple useful outcomes from our meetings. So Lisa does amazing graphic capture and also has a really funny cartoon about Zoom fatigue in the New Yorker, which we will encourage her to share with us later. But in any case, what you can do is completely changed now. So with that, I think it's a great moment for you to take a deep breath, because that was a lot. That was like here's a bunch of stuff about 10 rules, science, and practice, and go and work together to have a conversation about what you've learned, right? What have you learned that may be different from what we've discussed? And, while we've learned a ton, what remains a mystery to you? What part of running effective and meaningful meetings are you still really unsure about? So we're going to send you into breakouts. We're going to be in groups of 3 or 4, and you're going to have 8 minutes to go ahead and have this conversation. Joe, I haven't got enough wizardry to pull you out, so either come back or just have a nice conversation. And when we come back, Joe will talk about some science. All right, 8 minutes. Have a wonderful conversation. Oh, everybody's back.
Everybody's back.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Oh, I hope you had some really fascinating, interesting conversations, because I would love to hear some of what you've heard about. Now, we don't have time for every single person to share all of the cool new ideas that you have. So we're going to hear from like 4 or 5 people, and I would encourage you to raise either a digital hand or a physical hand, either way, and we'll call you out. So who heard something in your conversation that you thought is really worth sharing with this group? Nancy Settle-Murphy.
So we had a bit of a conversation at the end about how best to integrate asynchronous conversations in support of the goal of the real-time meeting. And we had one person had an example of how do we use a Slack conversation and take that content and embed it or relay it in a meeting. So how does that become part of the whole meeting?
Right. Super great challenge. Who talked about something different?
I can jump in. We talked a lot about what's missing, and that what we used to be able to get from face-to-face meetings was that sort of adjacent spontaneousness where you would jump in and have a conversation with somebody else after the meeting, and a lot of productive things came out of it as an outflow from the meeting, but it didn't happen in the meeting itself. You would bump into somebody and you would have the conversation, or you could hit somebody up to say, hey, how is this project coming? And we don't seem to have that opportunity yet in a virtual environment. Breakout rooms are great. I think the other thing we heard is that you really have to have a strong or a good leader to help drive the conversation. Otherwise, you run into what we happened in our breakout room where everybody looked around and said, what's the assignment? Who's going to jump in? I think that was a challenge. That's a challenge we still have to come and deal with. And Lewis had a great comment, and I'm going to call in him to relay it because I don't have his French je ne sais quoi to say it effectively. So.
Okay, so thanks, Betsy. It was very interesting what we shared. I read something in French. There's a guy, Mathieu Becher. Mathieu Becher is the CEO of Taxoon. I don't know if you know this tool, a bit like Miro and so on. And he wrote, l'oral n'est pas démocratique. In English, speaking is not democratic somewhere. And what is great in a remote meeting is that you can balance activities where people are talking or people are writing. Mm-hmm. And which means that you give everyone the ability to contribute, which could not always be so easy if you are around the table and where only the speakers can really contribute. And I think it's related to what was said just before by Nancy about the fact that what can you do synchronously and in a asynchronous manner. So, but I think there is really a big value in remote meetings where you can balance writing and speaking.
Right.
Excellent. It is right. It's the opportunity. And I think some of the research that Joe's going to show soon is going to help us embrace why we need to be seizing that opportunity to take more of the conversation into an asynchronous world. Before we move on, we have time for one more. What was something interesting you heard in your conversation, something different?
Sure, I'll talk for our group. We found that there's real value in having the participants prepared appropriately to contribute once they get to the meeting, and that perhaps is not often well done. And I think it's probably compounded because of the frequency of all these Zoom meetings, just as Betsy was saying. So I like, Luis, your point. Perhaps we could have attendees do a little bit of both ahead of time, a little bit of planning to think about what they want to speak about, but also perhaps jotting down some notes to bring into the meeting that would be more effective.
Yeah, I love that. And of course, they compound not only in terms of all of that, but in terms of having to follow all the rules, right? Because for somebody to prepare means you need to know what the purpose is, which means you need to know who's going to lead it. You need to know what kind of contribution you need. It just backs up and backs up, which is why at Lucid, we are so keen on systems. You know, how do you create frameworks and systems that make that possible without killing yourself with all the work that it takes to get all of that prep done? So just one quick note before I turn it over to Joe. Tom pointed out that the transcription was running during the breakout. I know. Welcome to the fully transparent living. If you think there are secrets, there are no secrets. It's all there. So you're welcome to go back and see Joe and I talk about how awesome it is that Lisa's here and a number of things like that. Patty, did you have a quick comment? I saw a hand. Okay.
No. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Joe.
And so you probably
Tell
all
us
know
all
that
about the new research.
Yes, I'm excited to share the new research with you. And if you did see the transcript during the breakout, you know that I had to take a moment to refresh myself and prepare for the presentation. And we'll talk about why that's important in a second. But let me go ahead and share my screen and share a few things with you and hopefully get you involved in that conversation as well. So let me see. Here we go. Can you see my slides? Yeah, there you go. Fabulous. All right. So so I want to introduce you to a few different things. But first off, you'll see there the title of this little presentation-ette, as we call it, is Suddenly Virtual, Making Remote Meetings Work, which is also the title of my book that's coming out later next month on the 9th. You're welcome to take a look at that if you want to. I think it's a fabulous, it's going to you're going to get a bit of that today, a bit of the details from there today, but there's a lot more in that. I'm a professor of industrial and organizational psychology, and I'm a meeting scientist, as many of you know. And we're not in a self-help group here. It's okay to like meetings and also to be a meeting scientist. We're among friends, so that's good. So if I get there we go. I can advance the slide. There we go. So first, I want to get you to reflect a moment or two on your experience of meetings. So in the chat, why don't you go ahead and put down what were your meetings like, in October of 2019? What was kind of the situation that you found yourselves in before the pandemic? A few months before the pandemic, this is October 2019. What did that look like? Often ineffective, in presence, less focus. So 20, maybe video was rare, more in person. Yeah, Nancy, Carrie, all in person, and snacks. Yeah. Now you can choose your own snacks, but then the other people were giving the snacks, right? Snacks is, and there's actually some research on that we can talk about some other time. Almost all contained video. Okay, cool. Angela. There was small talk. Yeah, that's something that I strongly recommended early on as we were in the pandemic. Was we need to have so we need to humanize our meetings a little bit, make sure everybody has a chance to say how they're doing and deal with some of that less formality that we might need. Less formal. Amy said that. Start 5 minutes late. Yeah, I have some fun research on it's actually yeah, it's okay in terms of the meeting outcomes if you start a few minutes late, but once you get past 5, it starts to be a real big problem. So anyway, okay, thank you everyone. I really appreciate sharing that. Now let's flip a little bit, and now in the chat, let's describe May of 2020. Okay, so now we're a couple of months into the pandemic. We're thinking that by fall of 2020 we're going to be back, face to face, even though that was a pipe dream. What were your meetings like in May of 2020? Endless and recurring. Thank you, Carolyn. All online. Yep. More meetings, more people, less focus. Okay. Not as productive as hoped for. Linda. Yeah. Doug, in May 2020, purposeful.
Well, I like that one where phone calls suddenly seem strange, right? Where before they were.
Yep.
Yeah. Phone calls seem strange. Yeah. Instead of Zoom or Teams. I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. People were afraid. All remote suddenly. Yeah. That's why I like the title of my book, Suddenly Virtual, right? We're all suddenly embracing that, whether we want to or not.
Right, you're on mute is the new.
Yep, yep, you're on mute. Okay, thank you so much. That I think we have a kind of a shared mental model, as we might call it, about our experiences in May of 2020. They were similar, and in October 2020, October 2019, they were similar as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. And we'll keep going here. Actually, I have a couple of polls that I want to ask now, and I don't know if Elise, if you're able to do that. Thinking about your meetings again before the pandemic. So, Elise, do you have that handy? And there we go, fabulous. So, if you could quickly do a little vote here on, what % of meetings were face to face in October 2019 for you?
And it looks like we've got, oh, everybody's coming in. Here come the votes.
Uh-huh.
All right, let's close this poll up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so in October 2019, according to the poll, 79.5% of your meetings were face-to-face. Okay, and that is actually the correct answer if you want to look at the statistics. That's about
Correct.
where it was, and we'll talk about that in a second. So let's do the second poll real quick here. So this is what percent of your meetings were face-to-face in May of 2020. So again, reflecting back and forth between these two time periods and two different worlds we've lived in recently or currently.
You don't have
Nancy White's got a good point. You need a 0.
Yep.
So you want us to pick 10 since there's no 0 if we're 0?
Well, again, this is for you, but yes, if 0 is the correct answer, pick 10 for you.
All right, and we're going to close this one in 3, 2, 1, ending. And surprise!
Okay. So no surprise, everyone picked. A lot of people picked 10%. Some are still having quite a few face-to-face meetings, which is totally fine, and that varies by industry, and that's why I didn't have a 0 there, because depending on your industry, depending on your situation, 10% is or some meetings, face-to-face are still very much happening. Okay, so let's look at what the data that I collected showed. So I'll go ahead and get the slides going again here. Okay. So going to the next slide here. This was the format pre and post COVID. So 77%, face-to-face pre-COVID, down to 11%, post-COVID. Post-COVID meaning during the pandemic, as we currently are now. And then video and went from 3%, 3.5% to 60%. So basically, when this all happened or has happened to us, the way we meet, the format with which we meet has changed, right? Well, also has the length. The length of our meetings has changed. And when I click, so the interesting thing about this data is I had the happy circumstance of collecting data in October 2019, asking all these questions, and then I collected it again in May of 2020. And so that's what we're comparing here. That's why I asked you to think about that, right? What was your life like? And the length of our meetings has actually gotten a little shorter. And one person asked me, well, is that just because of Zoom and your 40-minute limit? And we controlled for that. We've controlled for some of those factors, but we actually are a little bit shorter. All the different types of meetings were a little bit shorter. Even on video, we're about 5 minutes shorter than we were pre-COVID. The other thing we've learned is that the size of our meetings has gotten a little bit smaller, except for the hybrid meeting, okay? So face-to-face got smaller, telephone meetings smaller, video meetings smaller, and generally speaking, that's a good thing if you're doing convergent things, right? But if you're doing divergent things, you might need to do bigger. Hybrid, I think, was a little surprising that it went up, but I think part of the reason why it went up is that I think people are now starting to do it more, so that might affect that as well. Okay. So, what do these changes mean? Well, first off, it means that we're having to embrace technology, right? Which we all have done. There might be more work-family conflict, which, one thing that we found is some of the other data that I didn't collect, but others has shown that we're actually meeting a little bit more. Our days are a little bit longer. Our work days are a little bit longer, even though we're not commuting in many cases. And so we're having spillover into our family life or into our personal life from meetings. Electronic meeting fatigue, which we'll talk about more in a second here. But there's also new opportunities too, right? We can meet from anywhere, right? We can meet from our home office, from our kitchen table, from our couch, from the park if you've got good internet connection there, and so forth. So there's a lot of flexibility about the location with which we connect with others. And the overall reach of our services, the overall reach of what we do can be much greater because we're able to embrace these new environments. However, as some of you may have experienced or continue to experience this issue of Zoom fatigue or meeting, electronic meeting fatigue. And first off, I want to make sure everyone understands it is real. The data I've collected confirms that it's real. In case you had any doubts, it's all about emotional labor, which I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. I'm not sure how much we talked about that in our course, but emotional labor is humans' ability to regulate our emotions, to be more positive when we need to be more negative when we need to be, that sort of thing. Well, in meetings, we do this, right? You go to a meeting and your boss is proposing an idea that you're not real excited about, but you have to be excited about it because the boss is excited about it. Or you go to a meeting where you're having to do corrective action on for an employee who is not performing as well. And you may be actually having a really wonderful day, but you have to be very critical and you have to be very, a little more negative tone than you would naturally be. And so you labor to do that, right? And then the interesting thing is that this is all consistent with job demands and resources paradigm, this idea that as we expend more resources from ourselves, it drains us. And so we have a finite amount of those resources. And if we're doing more of this laboring, it's going to create more stress. Okay. And so I guess what I'd like to do in the chat for just a second, it would be to describe in your own words what Zoom fatigue feels like to you. So if you've experienced this, how did it feel? Beer inducing. Nice, Elise. Draining. Exhausted. Yep. My eyes are always tired. Yeah. Yeah. I actually got some blue light reducing glasses to try and help with that because I exactly as well. Sweating, emotionally drained, mental fatigue. Yeah. Bipolar. Okay. Physically heavy. Okay. Disconnected, hard to focus. Earache. Well, I guess if you're wearing the inside or outside your ears, you're gonna get some pressure there. Yeah, absolutely. Glazed. Yeah. Just waiting for the meeting. Yeah, I think you're describing a lot of the experiences that I think many of us have had with this whole Zoom fatigue, right? And it's a new layer of fatigue because of the increase in meetings, the different format that we're not as familiar with. We are now, but we weren't there before, right? And so it's really important to kind of think about that. Okay, so carrying on just a little bit further, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. I think it's neat to see others, validating the feelings that I've had, that we've all had in relation to having so many of these virtual meetings. And I think it's actually a little easier for us to engage in emotional labor in face-to-face settings than it is in a virtual setting. And we could talk about that more later if you would like. So what the data showed us, comparing October 2019 to May 2020, was that, and this is on a scale of 1 to 5 with a standard deviation of 0.5 roughly for these scales, for those of you who are egghead scientists like myself who wanted to know the numbers. But essentially what happened is we saw almost a full standard deviation increase in something called surface acting. And that's the faking the smile, right? It's like, can I help you when you don't really feel like helping the person, right? So it's that faking the right emotion for the circumstances. Now, the important thing to kind of keep in mind here is, what were the circumstances in May of 2020? Well, for many of us, it was a lockdown. It was working from home. It was kids at home from, not going to their actual school. They're at home and you're teaching them with the teachers sometimes, maybe. And so there was a whole host of other stress factors that would require us. So we can't, if we're thinking about those things and that's expecting us internally, surface acting is painting on a happy face in these meetings for work where we're supposed to be excited, enthusiastic, adaptive, flexible, because we're in this strange situation. And yet we have a whole world of life that's going on around us, wearing masks and so forth, that is not very comfortable. And so that dissonance is what's creating that fatigue, creating that mental and physical and emotional fatigue, which is Zoom fatigue. So you're probably thinking, okay, great. Thanks, Dr. Allen. You told me how awful it is. Well, that's the next question, is what do we do about it? Okay. And I've got three things that I want to share in relation to that. So first is recognizing the need for recovery. And I was really pleased to see people talking about the need for a purpose, the need for preparation for meetings, because on average, after a bad meeting, a person needs a roughly 17 minutes to recover. Now, most of our meetings are not bad. Most of our meetings are okay, which means you probably still need about 5 minutes to recover. And that's not because the meeting was bad. It could have been a really, really positive meeting, but it's because you're transitioning. Cognitive research, scientific research related to neuroscience and so forth suggests that we need 5 to 10 minutes to mentally switch from one topic to another in a meaningful way. And if we don't provide that time for each other, right? One, we don't have time to recover. One, we don't have time to go to the bathroom. So the issue is these back-to-back meetings, many of us experience, you go from one meeting to the next to the next, they're 30 minutes or they're an hour, and they're back-to-back. There's no recovery time. There's no cognitive switching time. There's no bathroom time. There's no, beverage refreshing. There's no, whatever you might need. And so recovery is really important. So one of the things that I advise people to do is, I ask them, why are you setting your meetings at 30 minutes? Why are you setting them at 60 minutes? Is that because of the default in your calendar? Ignore the default in your calendar. Give yourself and others a window of opportunity to recover and prepare for their next meeting, if only with the next meeting, or if they're going somewhere else. It gives them a moment to cognitively switch and perform that much better. So that's the first thing. The second thing that the science would suggest is that we should be engaging in the best practices that we knew before. And so, Elise, do you have the final poll I wanted to do? I think we could do that now. That would be great. Here we go. So what percentage of previously known meeting best practices still apply in the virtual meeting world?
And again, we don't have a 0 or a 99, 100 or anything.
That's the professor coming out of me, giving lots of plausible answers, but there's only one correct one, as it were.
I'm super curious to see how you scientifically evaluated this one. That'll be and got to the measure on this one. All right, folks. So let's finish this one up in 3, 2, 1, end poll. Let's see what we say.
All right, 80%. Correct. That is correct. Yes, 80% of the practices that we used prior to the pandemic still apply now. They still apply in a virtual world. And so you're probably and to answer Elise's question, how did we scientifically come to that conclusion? We did two things. One, we designed a checklist from based on all of science previous to the pandemic. This was something that I built back in October 2019, thinking that I would use it in a variety of situations for face-to-face meetings and so forth, right? And then we rebuilt that checklist for the virtual environment, and we compared the two. We said, okay, what's changed? What do we have to change here? What applies in a face-to-face that doesn't apply in a virtual, and so forth. And what we found was that about 80% was carrying right over from face-to-face to the virtual environment. The second way we did that is we asked people. We did a survey of people and said, okay, given your experiences with meetings, what best practices did you from previous do you still use now, right? And we tabulated that. So there's a lot of tabulation and so forth. But we found it was actually a little lower when we asked people. It was around 70%. So if you put 65, you get have partial credit. So, but people tend to. A lot of these are still true. So let me go ahead and share my slide just for another minute or so here. And so pre-COVID, they mostly still apply. The new environment, the virtual environment, certainly has some new best practices that we need to be considering, like calling on people by name, so that way the mute button and so forth don't keep us from contributing. The new best practice that I mentioned is, like that I just mentioned there was a facilitation. There's also the reducing the meetings by 10% in terms of length for that recovery. going off of the Zoom fatigue issue, and then embracing the ideas for on-camera optimization, the production value. Like I said, my background didn't look like this before. I had, I changed a lot of things. It was my cameras and computers and everything were all facing a different direction. And if they were right now, you see a lamp, you'd see a window, you'd see my fish tank, you'd see all sorts of other things that are wonderful, and I enjoy them. I like being able to see the outdoors, but they can distract from me talking to you. And so for the video framing, so there's lots of different things that do apply, but still, don't forget those things that you already know we should be doing anyway. And then the third thing I want to bring up is take advantage of new opportunities, sort of like we talked about with experimentation. Don't hesitate to try new things. You can partner with the Center for Media Effectiveness. Shameless plug there, but I love working with people working on making their meetings better. And if there's ways that I can help with that, I'm excited to do that, both from a research perspective, but also from just a practice and a practical perspective. The other thing is participate in generating new knowledge. I know Elise is always doing new things in this space. Some of you are also doing that. If there's ways that we can connect and collaborate in a meaningful way, let's do that. And I think that's something that we need to remember and keep going forward, even as we get vaccines, even as we transition to a new normal, et cetera. We should really not be afraid to embrace the opportunity to continue to reflect on our meetings and make them better. And so then if you want more, I have tons of insomnia curing research that I can provide to you about all the things that I've shared today, as well as all the top 10 practices and rules for meaningful meetings and so forth. There's also the book. I'm happy for you if you would buy that, not because it's going to make me any money. I might get another cup of coffee every now and then because of it, but because it has really helpful science-based practice that can be used by everybody, based on, and you saw some of that today in this presentation. So with that, back to you, Elise, or maybe I should answer some questions. I don't know.
Yeah, well, actually, let's play with some of these ideas, huh? So we are going to absolutely 100% hold you to that offer. Folks are interested in the science. I don't know how much meeting science they've read, so we'll see how they feel about that later. But it'll be folks want to see the science. They want to see your before and after checklist. So. Awesome. We're looking forward to seeing those. We're gonna, given that we have all of this stuff going on in our last 20 minutes together, we thought we'd spend some time looking at, okay, a lot has changed in the last 18 months. A lot's going to continue to change. It is a rapidly evolving landscape that we are all working in. So we thought we'd talk about some of the trends that we see, and then give you a chance to talk finally together, and also leave any questions for us, which we can answer afterwards and then asynchronously as well. So we make sure we get you all out on time. But Joe, I think a couple of the trends that we talked about before that we see absolutely coming up as a result of exactly what you just talked about. The first is, while we know that video meetings create richer connection and communication, we're starting to see a big backlash. Is anybody else starting to see people being less interested in being on video all the time? Like just waves?
Yep.
Yep. So one of the pieces of advice I'm seeing come from folks is turn on your video at the beginning to say hi, do a bunch of work. Turn it off, do a bunch of work, then put on your video at the end. So I'll be interested to see how the universe changes that way. Joe, do you want to talk about the next one we were talking about?
You'll have to remind me.
Remember?
I forget my list.
So I think we'll just talk about three of them real quick. You talked about the redefinition of the work and family life boundaries.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So that's another one that prior to the pandemic, there was a an area of research on work-life balance, work-family conflict, family-to-work conflict, etc. Right? And suddenly we all ended up going home in many cases, right? And had to work from wherever we could. And that meant being around family who were also home or whatnot, or just being in a very different environment. And so in the future, I think organizations are actually going to have to recognize this as an issue, as a problem, and be offering some things, for their employees to manage that. Then that's where I think we get into the hybrid, which we were going to talk about as well, Elise. But hybrid work environments, pre-2019, we used to, and I'll admit, we used to give people a hard time when they would work from home. Oh, you're just sitting in your sweats, you're just having a, drinking a cocktail and working, right? Well, now when everybody's at home, that stigma, is that going to come back? Right? Or our organization is going to embrace the idea of, let's make sure there's a space that people can come to, but let's not force the issue, right? Because that work-life balance thing is going to need to be discussed and considered, and we need to think about ways that as leaders and as organizational participants to figure out how to embrace that.
Right. So we see a massive shift in just a complete shift in the expectations, and we don't know where that trend's going to land. And then the final one that is unequivocal is a significant rise in the hybrid meeting. And that's a little bit of meeting speak. So for those of you who don't know what that means some people are all together in a room and some other people are either together in some other room somewhere else, or some of them are dialed in and whatnot. The meeting we're running today is a fully virtual meeting. But imagine that Patty and Zeno and Amy were all together in one room, and we were trying to figure out which one of them were raising their hand and which one of them is, on mute or not on mute. It's a very challenging environment. I don't know how many of you as facilitators have ever facilitated a team that was entirely in the room together and you were away. Yeah, right? Like, oh man, is that not a challenging thing? And that is coming, and that is coming with bells. So those are some of the things we see coming that create new challenges and new opportunities for learning, which is the question I would love for you to explore in a final breakout. Spend a little bit of time sort of reflecting on this and then giving us some guidance, because we are super down with continuing to innovate and explore in this space. And when we come back in 2023 to do this again, I am curious to know, what questions do you want to see answers to at that point, right? What do we not yet know that we should know by 2023? So I'm going to send you back into breakouts again for another 6 minutes to have that conversation. If it is unclear who the leader is, I encourage you to have the person whose name begins with the earliest in the alphabet begin the conversation. So, any questions about the topic or what is about to happen? All right, folks, have a wonderful conversation. 6 minutes.
Share it as it currently stands.
Awesome. Good. We'll post it all in the course.
Yeah, that'd be totally fine. Because it's
Welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
Joe and I were just discussing how to get access to all of this research that's under peer review and all of the rules and what we can share and what we can't share. So, and
gotta love that peer review and university policy procedure process, but we can get you a good amount of it. So yeah, happy to do that. And a lot of it is in the book as well, but yeah.
I don't know that it will answer your questions that you came up that you want to see answered in 2023. So how did that conversation go? What should we be talking about in 2 years? I'd love to hear from some folks about what they discussed. Who would like to share first? Linda.
Well, it was interesting because for some of us, it was really hard to imagine this future perfect world. Although we talked about the proliferation of hybrid and some of the challenges in the whimsical way in which I was thinking, we had been so successful with the technology and it has advanced to such a level that we're able to feel a sense of connectedness with people who are very different from ourselves, and that we are beginning to have far more international connections because of this experience with this crisis. People feel far more engaged in the online environment than we had ever experienced back in 2021. And we have been able to simulate some of the richness of face-to-face experiences online, although in 2021, we had no idea that that could even be possible. And I'm complete.
All right. So is there a question in there? Is there a question in any of your, I see Betsy's got a lot of notes here. Does anybody else have a question they want to pose for our future research?
I think one of the questions that we were looking at was I saw repeated was, what can we really expect advances in tech-wise that help make the hybrid sort of meetings a first-class experience by default? And I don't know the answer to that.
That makes for the best kinds of research, right? Stuff that we don't actually know the answer to yet. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Who else talked about something different? Was something different that came up in your conversation that really struck you from all of this?
For me, it was the idea of culture, and how does a hybrid meeting affect your work culture? Because you're going to have people who are individually at home or wherever, and you're going to have a collective group of people together. And that could create, power differentials, dynamic differentials that will impact productivity. And so I'd love to talk, that would be my question, is how do, companies will navigate that going forward. I also dropped an article in the chat box from Sloan Kent, from one of the schools, about multimodal leadership skills and what does it take, for leaders to, and it kind of gets to your point, Joe, about, people exchanging leadership roles, because it will take leadership skills, different leadership skills. And what are those really for a hybrid meeting to be effective?
Yeah, those are
I had something.
Sorry, Martin, you go ahead.
No. So we talked about how horrible hybrid meetings were pre-COVID as well as during COVID, or actually more pre-COVID. And we talked about the need for each person having a touch point, the same touch point, whether they're hybridly connected, whether they're face-to-face or whether they're connected through technology, they still have to have the same connection points. Otherwise, it becomes really imbalanced.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's, if you wanted to describe my next area of research, you pretty much hit it, Patty and Martin. Right now, I'm actually launching 2 studies right now on hybrid meetings, as certain areas of the world are able to transition more to the hybrid context. We're studying it right now. I'm also working on putting together some recommendations and best practices and so forth related to that, because what you described is actually what we saw. There was a few meetings that we collected in 2020 where we saw a hybrid setting, right? People were masked up in one room and we had a person on video, and to just imagine that situation. And what we found is that the sharing of contribution was really, by camera screen as opposed to by number of individuals, right? And so I immediately realized, oh my goodness, there's an issue here. There's a communication network problem that we have to solve, and so that's coming.
So speaking of problems and opportunities and things to solve, one of the best practices that applies both in person and online and in all settings is ending on time. So we are explicitly at the end of our time. So here's something that you can expect going forward. After this call, we will in fact edit the recording. We'll send that out. We'll send out as many links to all of the things as we can possibly find. The studies, the tech that we looked at, the slides, all of those things will be yours. Let them eat results. And we in this community love to do the thing where the speaker, as if we were in the room, we hang out. So if you'd like to hang out with us and continue the conversation for another 10 to 15 minutes, after party on. But otherwise, please know that we very much appreciate your contributions, spending the time with us. And Lisa, shall we show them what you found so far? Because I know she'll work on this afterwards, but why don't we pin Lisa and just kind of see what Lisa's takeaway for us all is going to be.
Pin me, baby.
Yeah.
So, I
Nice.
kept having so much good information. I kept having to move things around, and I was waiting for your bluff. Don't you have a bluff?
I do, but I ran out of time.
Oh,
so
good.
I
there's space for you at the bottom. So anyway.
Everybody who's been here before knows I love the bluff. If you would like to stay and add a bluff for both Lisa and I, the bluff prompt is this. In one word or phrase, what's one insight or idea from this session that really stood out for you? And sharing that will give Lisa a chance.
Yes, and can you remind me what bluff is? BLUF.
The bluff stands for bottom line up front. So the bluff technique is for everybody who watches this who dropped out early or didn't have a chance to join us because 150 people registered, 50 some showed up, 37 stuck to the end. What should they, as they watch the recording, be watching for in one word or phrase? That is the bluff prompt. And if anybody would love to contribute that, both Lisa and I would love it.
Zoom fatigue is real? I don't know.
It's true. It is real.
All right. I see things in the chat. I see thank yous. I see shout outs. I see maintain humanity however and wherever we meet. Love that, Nancy.
It will get better.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it will.
I like that.
Linda, science is real. Isn't that wild? Meeting science, it's a thing.
Yeah.
All right, friends. Does anybody have a question that they would love to ask while we are all still here? Because we are officially complete.
Yeah, what questions do you have for me? I would love to answer any that I can.
One of the questions that we had during that last session was when there are certain different types of meeting that you have, like some are pattern-based, some are sort of totally ad hoc. And what's the split between those types of meetings, and how does it matter if we're online or not? Is there a different way to address an totally ad hoc versus a structured pattern-based meeting?
Yeah, I mean, for both of those, for a pattern-based meeting, you should have an agenda and you should have a procedure that you're typically trying to follow. And there's a variety of those, and Elise has some fabulous ones that I like. And so I think that's the obvious one for the informal meeting, as it were, or the check-in, that sort of thing. It's okay to have a pattern, but there are some benefits to a balance of structure versus not structure. And so my advice on that would be, for the check-ins, that sort of thing, make sure that there's a purpose, that you've identified the purpose, but don't overstructure it. Otherwise, you lose some of the opportunity for some of the humanity that you might need. So it's one of those things where there's a balance. Like you don't want to overschedule everybody with all these check-ins and blah, 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 but you also need to have opportunities for people to bump into each other, in an environment that's not really bumpable.
One thing we have a client that's been doing that I think is really brilliant and wonderful is in their regular team check-in meeting, they do the normal stuff, like they do their greetings and their business and whatnot. And then when they get to the section where they're trying to work together to clear blocks, right, which is a really typical thing to do in a business weekly team meeting. You're like, okay, we're running into these problems. They identify what those blocks are, and then they assign each of the key priority blocks to a different pair and send them off into breakouts, pairs or dyads, where those people will work in 2s and 3s to like make progress on that block. And this is doing a couple of things at the same time. One, it's getting them to mix up into different combinations, so they're team building and their familiarity of working together on something real goes way up. So it's a great intimacy thing. And what you know, as you've just experienced, that whatever happens in breakouts, you can't control whatsoever. So it creates some of that outside of the leader's viewpoint sort of serendipity. And we find that people rate meetings higher when they get actually successful results out of them, right? That actually are useful to them, where they're making a contribution in a meaningful way at work. And that way, every single person is making meaningful contributions to something they need to get done for work. So it's like this quadruple win of serendipity, parallel processing with the people all working on problems at once, and using the technology in interesting ways.
Joe, what are the key tips you have for what you call hybrid meetings? Could you already share some ideas? Even though you are writing your book, I know that.
Yeah, well, there's a chapter in the current book on hybrid meetings. I wrote it back, 6 months ago, not quite 6 months ago, and so there's some ideas there. So a couple of things I've already mentioned, which is strong facilitation. Whoever is responsible for the meeting has to be willing to say, I need to hear from this group, I need to hear from that group. That has to happen, because one of the things that I'm researching right now is that the network of communication. When you have a face-to-face meeting, the network is contained with that face-to-face group. When you have a virtual meeting and everyone has a camera, you know where the lines can go. Once you now have a group here and a group here and a group here, you need to have people in each of those rooms who make sure that they don't end up creating their own little communication network and forget about the other nodes in the meeting, the other people in the meeting, other groups or other individuals. So it's really, really important to have a very strong facilitation effort by the leader. And it's important to train people on how to make sure that they stay involved. And so that's one of the things that I would say about this is a lot of the tips that I'm going to be writing about or providing and that sort of thing. They're not always intuitive, like in a face-to-face meeting. A lot of them are to have a purpose, blah, blah, blah. Those are all still true. But in these meetings, these hybrid meetings, there's a skill set. And I'm one of the things that worries me is that just like with the suddenly virtual situation where we went from not virtual to virtual, there was a skill gap and there was a little bit of a decline, and then people kind of tested things out and figured it out and got a camera and got a chair they could sit in, whatever, right? We're going to run into the same thing for organizations when it comes to the hybrid meeting. The facilitation is needed, recognizing the differences in communication, ensuring participation across the subgroups, not forgetting about the person who's on the phone connected to one group but not connected to the whole group. So there's a whole lot of attention that needs to be paid to how do we prepare our people to do this. We need to have a training associated with it, and we need to be able to do that. Otherwise, we'll see the same thing, but I think it'll be more dramatic. I think they'll see a dip in productivity by people in their collaborative efforts and that sort of thing, but it'll be more dramatic in this case because these are not skills that are, that people already know, that they've already prepared for and are able to just jump in and do.
As a comment from someone that's been a remote participant before COVID, our typical way of doing that is you have a group that's meeting in a single camera at one point, and then and a speakerphone and mic in the middle of the table, and everybody's volume drops for the people that are in there. So at least having a headset for every participant, so we can at least hear everything.
Yeah.
Plus, there's at least one device, an Aller or something like that, that has a camera in it that rotates to face the person speaking. That sounds like good technology to me.
Yeah, so
I haven't experienced it, but
yeah, that's great, Jim. I appreciate that because you're right. There are some technological things that we need to consider as well, like volume control, right? Making sure, because it's really hard to have a side conversation if everybody can hear it, right? Whereas in these hybrid settings, if we don't have that set up, like right now, it's really hard for me to have an actual physical conversation, verbal conversation with Doug, for example, right now in this virtual meeting. Now I could type it in the chat, sure, but I couldn't do it like this, without everybody else hearing it. And so I think you're right, Jim. That's a great idea, a great thought there is if we mic everybody, now those side conversations that are likely to happen in these hybrid settings are going to be minimized because they don't want to necessarily have those heard, just like you wouldn't want them heard if you're having a side conversation in a virtual meeting.
That said, I do know, we know the folks at Owl Labs and Kubi, which is another of that one you can put an iPad on a robot, and the robot, if you get the big one, it can like drive around and come visit you and stuff, which is really fun. And the way in which people react to them is pretty mixed. It's a just like Zoom was unnatural for us for a very long time, those things are also unnatural in some really interesting ways. So definitely not a solved problem. It'll be fascinating, Joe. You need to talk to the OWL people about what they've learned as you work on your new book.
Yeah.
And I know the folks at Logitech have strong thoughts about whether those are good ideas or not. So.
Yeah, and I think Elise, you and I've talked about it, that some people might say, you know what, this is not working. Everybody go back to your one camera, one person, situation, and that might be the right answer for some people, rather than having a hybrid situation.
Fabulous. Well, folks, do you have a question, or are you saying goodbye?
Yeah. Yes, a tiny question. Could you tell us a bit more about partnering with the Center of Meeting Effectiveness? What would that mean? Or
so I'm, as the director of Center for Meeting Effectiveness, there's a variety of things that we do there, from everything from simple observation of people's meetings and giving them some tips on them specifically, that sort of thing, to full scale, large, grant funded research initiatives, by, from private and government agencies, that sort of thing. So it's everything in between. So if there's an interest in partnering with me in that regard, reach out to me via email. You can, I think the email, I can put that in the chat or whatnot, but reach out to me that way. You can also find a link to my contact information on my website. And so, just connect with me, and then we can have a conversation.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging with us. Thank you for all of your ideas and your contributions. Lisa is going to get us a copy of her cartoons soon, which are thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day, evening. Really appreciate your time.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Bye. Okay.